well, without further ado, as you know, we are Well Balanced Nutrition. We offer nutrition and wellness coaching in the triangle and triad, and mostly virtual right now. And we're so excited that you're here. Raise your hand if you can relate to any of these things right here. Wow, hormones can be a roller coaster ride. So put a Y in the chat box if you're like, yes, me. You get these crazy, my favorite here on the bottom is, I'm fine, I hate you, I love you, I want ice cream, come here, go away, oranges?
That is very relatable. I know several times in my life, my brain and train of thought has gone just like that.
Yes. Thank you for chiming in the chat. Today, I really hope to shed some light. Let me tell you how much of a struggle we had really tackling the subject of hormones in a way that is still fun and not too heavy or technical. Hormones can be a really big subject to tackle. And today, my hopes are just that what we share with you can empower and enlighten you to start seeing your hormones as a way for biofeedback, for understanding what's happening and knowing what to do next. Bella, tell us a little bit about what they'll learn today.
So you are going to learn the truth about hormones and how they can affect your overall health and well-being, and kind of what happens when our hormones start to fluctuate and we start to ride a little bit of a roller coaster with them. And then, of course, some wonderful nutrition and lifestyle strategies that can help you regulate your hormones, get a little bit more support from your diet, and just help you feel your best.
Yes. So let's start with knowing that understanding hormones means understanding our endocrine system. And here's the truth about hormones. It's quite complex. There is an entire medical field about the endocrine system, and then specialties even further into specific disorders or malfunctions of our endocrine system. It is a complex system that affects several aspects of our lives. And we first have to understand a little bit about the endocrine system. So we're just going to do a quick overview of it. I'm going to try to share my screen and play this video without messing things up. But I think it gives a really great short visual of what's happening in our endocrine system.
The story of hormones starts with the glands. These are the hormone factories that make up what's known as the endocrine system. The glands secrete hormones to induce specific responses from your cells and organs. Once released, the hormones travel in the bloodstream and bind themselves to receptors on their target cells. Like a lock and key, these receptors are the perfect fit for a particular kind of hormone. For example, when we experience stressful situations, the stress hormone adrenaline is released from the adrenal glands, which prepares our body for the fight or flight response. Similarly, when the sun sets and there's a lack of daylight entering our eyes, a signal is sent to the pineal gland in the brain, which releases melatonin and tells our bodies it's time to go to sleep. Well, that's how it's supposed to work anyway. The trouble is, the endocrine system doesn't always behave like it's meant to. Take a condition like diabetes. There are different forms of this disease, but in all types, the body's hormones lose the ability.
All right. So that is a nice picture of, what is happening. And I have a different analogy for you to consider as we move forward, and only if I can get the slides to be back up. Another way to think about it is that hormones are chemical messengers in our body. They are taking in all the information from the inside and outside world and turning that into a message that it can then deliver to different parts of the body. So a hormone is like the car with the message. And then our circulatory system is the highway, the road system that the cars are going to travel along. And our endocrine system is made up of all these little car factories that will produce specific types of cars with different jobs and different messages that they'll do. And there's hundreds and hundreds of different hormones out there. So as you can imagine, everything that's going on in our bodies are most likely to do with these messengers that are running about, driving about.
So hormones really affect a lot of different things. And I know a lot of time when we think about hormones, we think maybe just about reproductive health, but really hormones are constantly affecting many things throughout the body and our overall wellness. Things such as sleep, our mood, our energy, even the cravings that we have. As I always like to say, it's not you, it's your hormones. And it can really be affected by many things. So, dietary and lifestyle choices really heavily affect, the balance in our hormones. And that's why today we're just going to cover a couple, because as Kristen said, that there's hundreds of hormones, so we're just going to focus on a handful. And then, of course, as wellness and nutrition coaches, Lucy, Kristen, and I really want to focus on the lifestyle and dietary components that can support your hormone health and help you feeling your best.
So because of that, it might not be surprising to you that the things you can do to balance and support your hormones are the things that we generally think of that promote well-being. Things like doing yoga, relaxation techniques, having good relationships, moving our bodies, and having good nutrition and being exposed to light. So all of those things we do for our well-being are very much connected to hormone health. And we'll see that hormones naturally fluctuate. And this isn't something that's bad. It happens, and it's part of nature, this ebb and flow. All of our hormones play a very important role, and we don't want to go without them per se. And we also don't want them to go out of whack either. We don't want them to be elevated when they're not used to being elevated. That's where we can see some things that are unpleasant for us to experience. But our hormones will ebb and flow in the circadian rhythm, right, from day to night, and in that 24-hour period. Our hormones fluctuate for those with female reproductive organs in the menstrual cycle, and as well in the life cycle from childhood to later in life, we see these fluctuations. So let's dive into some of these, starting with the circadian rhythm. These are some really cool charts that I came about. And if you draw your attention to the orange line on these charts, this is the cortisol. Now, cortisol you might think of as a stress hormone, but it plays a very important role in waking us up in the morning. We see a natural surge, and this transitions our bodies into wakefulness. And from the top to the bottom in these charts, you see with infancy to childhood, adolescence, adulthood, and then later in life, the natural ebb and flow will change. So in childhood, you see a pretty big melatonin spike, and it's a large period of time that they need to sleep. Then in adolescence, you see that time of day shift. The melatonin is a little later, and that's why teenagers go to bed late and like to sleep in. It's their natural ebb and flow at that stage of life. And then you see it change even more in adulthood, and then later in life, which is about 65 and up, that sleep window is even smaller, and those surges aren't as large and pronounced, which just means that that is a time to really focus on getting your sleep and doing the things that can promote good sleep on your own, because it's not coming naturally. So these are the two main hormones that really help us get a good night's sleep: cortisol, that is waking us up, and the melatonin, that is making us feel sleepy when we sense that darkness. That's why we call it the hormone of darkness. So this is just one illustration of how our hormones naturally fluctuate within the circadian rhythm and throughout life. So how can we support these two hormones? Because sleep is one of the best things we can do for our wellness. It is like a reset button. And, just like a computer needs to reset, our bodies need that. And so much is happening when we're sleeping. Lucy says, maybe I'll finally be able to enjoy a nap after I turn 65. Yeah. Parenthood, right? So diet tips that can support this natural fluctuation. Whether or not you feel like you're a good sleeper, pay attention, because these things are really important. I read a book and studied the information from a sleep expert, Matthew Walker. Look into him if you're interested in sleep at all, because he knows all the things. One of the things he suggests is that we cut caffeine out at noon or earlier, because caffeine has a half-life of about 6 to 7 hours, but a quarter life of even longer. So let's say we're having a cup of coffee to boost us in the afternoon when we're naturally feeling a little sleepy. Well, then when we go to bed in the evening, that caffeine is still in our system, making it harder for us to get into that rest and relaxation mode. He also says, which I think is crazy, that when we have that afternoon cup of coffee on a regular basis, we are interrupting our good quality sleep, affecting it by 20%. And this is the equivalent of aging ourselves 15 years. Wow. So if you are finding yourself reaching for that cup of coffee, or maybe it's a soda with caffeine, you might want to think about that, because that deep sleep is super important. Likewise, we tend to go for a glass of wine to unwind us at the end of the day, and it might make us feel sleepy because it is a sedative. But what happens is later in the night, it tends to mess up our sleep, fragment our sleep, and interrupt the natural cycles that we want to experience with deep sleep. So think twice about that nightly glass of wine, because it could really be offsetting that reset button that you're trying to get with a good night's sleep.
Definitely. Sometimes wine is great, but not necessarily for the sleep. So research has shown that the Mediterranean and DASH diets support hormone health by providing lots of nutrients that create a foundation for our overall health. And these diets are packed with plants, which means those that follow this kind of eating pattern get a variety of sources of fiber, healthy fats and proteins, along with vitamins and minerals and these magical compounds called phytochemicals that have numerous benefits in the body. And then excess sugar can also affect our sleep because it is so closely tied to the blood sugar and insulin roller coaster that takes place based on when and what we eat. So sometimes we see, those that have excess sugar on a regular basis might have some more dramatic fluctuations in their hormones.
Another thing that we can do to support the natural fluctuation in the circadian rhythm is, in the daytime, get outside and experience a lot of natural light. And then in the evening, expose ourselves to that darkness.
Yeah, there's a great podcast that I just listened to, and there was a neuroscientist on there, and he was talking about how important these light fluctuations are in our day. And if you wake up, before the sun, to turn on, a light or a lamp, or just get some exposure to some brightness, helps your body start to wake up. And then the same for at night. Instead of having, if you have ceiling lights, maybe using a lamp instead, because avoiding any overhead light will help our bodies start to think that, oh, the sun is setting and it's time for us to get a little bit more sleepy and more restful. And that definitely translates into our hormonal health.
Yes, absolutely. So the light signaling your wakefulness, providing that message that, hey, this is daytime. And then when we experience that darkness, that's when the melatonin will deliver the message, hey, let's start to get sleepy. And those are very important. Another way that our hormones are going to fluctuate throughout the day are related to our appetite. We have hormones that deliver the message, we're hungry, it's time to eat, and hormones that deliver the message, hey, we've had enough, let's stop. So when our stomach is empty, and typically we see this before our regular meal times, ghrelin is the hormone that'll say, hey, it's time to eat, I've got a good appetite. And then it's suppressed after we eat. And the fullness we feel in our stomach is going to signal these satiety messages that, hey, we've had enough. It's okay to stop eating now. And we all want to feel full, right? It's no fun to have that empty stomach feeling. One thing that we can do to support that satiety feeling and get that message to our brains is really focus on fiber, protein, and water. These are really the foods that are going to signal those satiety hormones to come out and make us feel really full. And wouldn't you know, these are mostly plant foods.
Yes, it comes full circle back to a couple slides ago talking about those Mediterranean and DASH diets. They are, a majority of plants. And a lot of the time you might think fruits and veggies, which is true, but it's also things like nuts and seeds, beans and lentils. And these are all great sources of that fiber and that protein that keep us fuller longer and help us, feel like we're on more steady of a ride throughout the day rather than being up and down. And same goes for our hormones. When we're eating more fiber and protein and having more water, our hormones will also be a little bit steadier throughout the day as well.
Yes, absolutely. And one thing, we don't really want our ghrelin levels, that appetite hormone, to be really high. And how many of you have made this mistake? Dieting or over-restricting can trigger that ghrelin level to be elevated, along with cortisol, the stress hormone. So talk about a major backfire. We're trying to be restrictive and our body is saying, whoa, we're in danger. We cannot do this. Remember that our hormone and our endocrine system like balance, and their job is to keep things at homeostasis, which means balance, the norm, what it's used to. So back in the day, this made perfect sense. We have to go find our food. So our body's going to say, hey, we're getting a little low on energy here. I'm going to give you an appetite, a desire to go get your food, and the cortisol, the excitement, and the energy to go find it, go attack it, go hunt it. And that was great for that time period because it kept us alive. It gave us what we needed to get that food and that energy. Well, now that food is abundant, really what this is triggering is these high calorie foods that aren't that great for us and can lead to these cravings of pizza and French fries and donuts, things that are really high energy. Lucy says, fun fact, it takes my body more time to feel full when I'm not in a flare-up, sometimes up to 30 minutes after I'm done eating. Anyone else notice a delay in the fullness signals? That's a good point.
I definitely do. I can vouch for Lucy there as well. Sometimes, some days I feel very, full right after I eat, and sometimes I stop and then I think I might go for a snack, and then that fullness finally kicks in.
Emily asked, how does this work with intermittent fasting? Well, it's interesting because there's a little bit of research on intermittent fasting and how it lowers ghrelin But in the short term, you're probably going to experience hunger and appetite. So I think our bodies vary very much to how they tolerate intermittent fasting, and we have to pay attention to that and honor that and not push the limits too much there.
It's also important with intermittent fasting when you are maybe just starting off to slowly, very slowly decrease your window. They say literally like decrease it by an hour like every week because of the hormones and what goes on. And then it's very important to stay in that window. So some people think, well, I'm on a 12-hour window. I'll eat 8 to 8 one day, 7 to 7 the next. It's really important to try and stay in that same window as much as possible. So if you choose to eat from like 7 to 7, try and eat 7 to 7 as much as possible, because a lot of our cells work like 24-hour clocks and they get used to a certain pattern, which then affects how the hormones play out in our body.
Yes.
So not only does dieting and lifestyle choices affect the cortisol and ghrelin, it also affects our hormone fluctuations during our cycle. And so this slide is a great representation of some of the hormones that go up and down throughout our cycle. And so right here on the left, you see that right before menstruation, those progesterone and estrogen levels start to decline, and estrogen actually hits its lowest point. And a fun little easy way to remember that is that hormones are low before you flow. And then we enter into the follicular phase once menstruation stops. And in the beginning, hormones are still low, but as time goes on and the body enters the late follicular phase, follicle stimulating hormone, for it to be specific, gets very high because it's preparing our bodies for ovulation, which comes next. And it's also common for people to feel their best during the follicular phase because of how the hormones are. And our metabolism actually slows. And there's been studies that have shown that women just naturally eat less, or those that identify as women will eat less during this time because of where the body's at. And it's not necessarily intentional. It's just how the hormones regulate our appetite. And then as the body enters into ovulation, you can see hormones continue to rise. And one in particular is called luteinizing hormone, and that's what triggers the release of an egg. And testosterone isn't on this slide, but it is also very high at this time. And that causes a change in energy, and a lot of the time people start to feel energetic because of the testosterone. And then hormones take a little bit of a dip down after that, but then as we enter into the luteal phase, they start to ramp up again. And this is a time of increased metabolism because, as you can see, the hormones are higher, which means our metabolism is higher. So it's important to support our body during that time. And then they'll plummet right at the end of the luteal phase because that means menstruation is about to take place again. So what can we do to nutritionally support our bodies during the different phases of the cycle?
Bella, can I stop you and see if you have any thoughts on this question about how does hormonal contraception play a role in this cycle?
So depending on the birth control you are on, a lot of the time if you're taking the pill and you still, get your period, you might be going through the phases pretty closely to someone that's not on birth control. But as far as like IUDs, implants, and the shot, I want to say that it might be slightly different. I'm not 100% certain if it's exactly the way it is when you're not on birth control, but there is some sort of flow that your body is in, and you will have a fluctuation of hormones depending on the phase that you're in. It's just how extreme are the phases when you are on that contraception.
Shannon, sorry you have to go. Yes, we will. You can see this recording on Facebook Live, so you can catch the rest another time. So also things that, with the contraception, you're still getting these hormone fluctuations, but there's actually not the ovulation happening. And the beginning of your phase is where kind of your wall, the lining of your uterus wall is thickening and preparing for that. And then the second half is kind of a shedding of that when ovulation doesn't occur. So those things are still happening. It's just the prevention of the ovulation, or either ovulation or the egg being fertilized. So tell us how we can support these natural fluctuations through our diet.
Alrighty, I find this to be very fascinating. I so much enjoyed being able to take a look more deeply into each phase. So during menstruation, it is important to replenish the blood that is lost when we're bleeding. So iron-rich foods include things like beans, peas, lentils, enriched grains, flax seeds, chicken, beef, oysters, and clams. But it's also important to focus on healthy fats and healthy proteins to help our body, during this time of the low hormonal status. So things like avocados, some Greek yogurt, other sources of protein like ground turkey are really great. And if you also experience PMS symptoms during this time, such as cramping, bloating, things like ginger, turmeric, raspberry leaf tea, ginger tea can really help with symptoms such as the cramping. So then as the body enters into the follicular phase, as I mentioned, the metabolism slows down a little bit and you probably naturally eat a little bit less. But that's why it's important to focus on nutrient density in order to get, the bang for your buck with what you're eating. So things like eggs, chicken, nuts and seeds, oats and barley, berries, stuff of that sort have lots of nutrients, lots of fiber, lots of protein, water, and healthy fats that will help us stay full and satiated after every meal. And then during ovulation, hormones are high and your liver is trying to get rid of that excess estrogen and hormones, filter it out. So things like cruciferous veggies, high fiber foods like the broccoli, the cabbage, cauliflower, apples, pears are really great at helping your body flush it out. And just easy ways to get more fiber in during this time could be, a nice big salad topped with maybe some seeds or some nuts for some added crunch, or a smoothie with lots of fruits and seeds. These are just easy little ways to increase the fiber intake. And then lastly, in the luteal phase, it is marked by that increase in metabolism due to that spike back up in hormones. So it's important to eat things like complex carbs, which include squash, quinoa, sweet potato, brown rice, because those will help, prevent the large spikes and dips in blood sugar and kind of keep our energy more stable. And then other things that are great to eat during this time if you experience bloating or water retention and feel kind of puffy, foods that are rich in calcium can help with that. So examples of that are almonds, pumpkin seeds, dark chocolate, which is great because a lot of us crave chocolate at this time anyways. And that can kind of help reduce some of that water retention that you feel. And then other foods like chickpeas, raisins, dates, those are very nutrient dense foods and are great to support your body during this high metabolism state.
All right, y'all. Who remembers I Love Lucy? Put a 1 in the chat box. If you remember Lucy and Ethel and how they were a pair like yin and yang that went together. Lucy was the wild, outgoing, funny, and Ethel was her loyal sidekick that can also kind of bring her down and balance her out a little bit. Who didn't love this wonderful couple? They just worked so well together. So we can think about our the hormones that Bella was just talking about, especially estrogen and progesterone, like Lucy and Ethel. And as we age, and in any time of stress or dysfunction, it's really important to understand the relationship between estrogen and progesterone. because that can, I think it will really be revealing and helpful to know what's going on. So I want you to think about this pair, and I want you to think about estrogen as Lucy, outgoing, go-getter, and feels like she can take on the world. Biochemically, what estrogen is good at is promoting insulin sensitivity, which means our bodies can absorb and use up the energy from carbohydrates easily. Estrogen biochemically makes us less reactive to cortisol, to stress, so we can tolerate a little more stress when estrogen is elevated or dominant, is what we like to say. And estrogen also promotes fat release around the waist, so keeping our waist thinner. And she is really dominant in the first part of the female menstrual cycle. So this might be the time where you're feeling on top of the world, you're feeling very energetic and confident like Lucy. However, towards the middle to the end, you see a little dip in estrogen, and progesterone comes out and becomes dominant. So you can think of progesterone like Ethel. She's a little more reserved. She's concerned about her twin sister estrogen, and she's concerned about the world. Biochemically, she's really concerned about having a baby and staying safe. She's also like your homebody. She's really good at relaxing, hanging out with her plants and her cats and her warm blankets. So she comes out and kind of calms estrogen down a little bit towards the end of this natural cycle. And this is really the time to rest and relax and do a little bit less. And progesterone is naturally good at reminding us to do that. This natural ebb and flow of their relationship works rather nicely until it doesn't. So things start to fizzle out a little bit with this relationship as we age, or this can also happen in other stages of our lives. For example, when we're postpartum and we're breastfeeding, it can resemble a little bit of this perimenopause or menopause. And then in high levels of stress, or if you're an athlete who's going hardcore, maybe sees a little bit of these perimenopause or menopause symptoms. But you see in this perimenopause phase that progesterone, or Ethel, starts to take a little bit more naps. She's really good at relaxing, and she is low, really hanging low. And then Lucy's kind of left to her own devices, a little bouncy up and down, and you don't have that same dynamic that you once had. So in perimenopause, you're seeing these fluctuations that can influence your mood, hunger, cravings, motivation. And that's why, because we're seeing those dips. And when you get into menopause, that estrogen kind of starts to dip down as low as progesterone. And you don't have that dynamic duo that you once had that was so active. So what do we do about this natural occurrence? Well, if it's happening because of stress, we can really manage that stress. If it's happening because of age, we can manage that stress. We need to be our own caregiver and advocate. When Ethel is napping, we need to now pay really close attention to these activities that can promote relaxation. Can you talk a little more about this, Bella?
Of course. So it's common for us to think that when our bodies change during this peri and menopausal phases, that we need to maybe compensate with a new diet or a new exercise regimen. But however, doing so can actually exacerbate what's going on. That's why it's so important to partake in activities that show your body love and, support, a healthy mindset. So things like meditation, bubble baths, laughing, gardening can create an environment for relaxation place. And then gentle movements such as yoga, walking with a friend, getting out in nature, getting out in your garden can be exactly what the body needs without stressing it with too high impact of activity. And then, of course, honoring your body by fueling it with nutritious foods is always great and will support your hormones during this time of changes. And then also enjoying the yummy treats that you crave and enjoy when you really want them. It's not about restricting, sugar or carbs or anything like that. It's about a healthy balance of eating nutritious foods and then also eating the fun foods.
Absolutely. This is not a time for extreme diets or extreme exercise. So we've been talking a little bit about the female reproductive system, but stress reduction is for everyone at every stage, and whether they have a female system or not. Because cortisol is another hormone that we've talked about a little bit already, and when it is elevated because of stress and it stays elevated, we can see a lot of hormonal dysfunction, cravings, low appetite, urges to binge, and even can cause a pause in your natural menstrual cycle, as we mentioned as well. So managing cortisol is really important for everyone. Now, short burst of cortisol is something our bodies can tolerate and are used to tolerating. It's only when we don't have that recovery moment that it can turn into a negative thing. So the 3 M's are ways that we can support normal levels of cortisol. The first M is mindfulness. So first we have to be aware of what's happening in our body. We can usually feel the cortisol levels rise. We can feel that fight or flight system going into play. Maybe we tense up. And we can also just be aware of our emotions and the things that we're experiencing in a non-judgmental way and with compassion. The other M is movements. Moving throughout the day, getting a lot of activity is very healthy for our hormones, for our cortisol. Getting outside is helpful for our circadian rhythm, and it's also helpful for our insulin. There's just numerous ways that moving throughout the day is really powerful for our hormone health. And if you had to pick between moving a lot throughout the day and exercising, moving a lot throughout the day would actually be more impactful and is better than sitting all day long and then doing some exercise. Then lastly, meals, balanced, regular, avoiding extreme restrictions, really managing and honoring the hunger and the cravings, because we can really see those things like our hunger, our energy levels, our cravings as biofeedback from our hormones that we need something. If we're experiencing a lot of hunger, we can eat more regular meals, or we can focus on the satiating foods that we talked about. So we've talked a little bit about using what we experience from hormones as a biofeedback that can tell us what to do, tell us to get more rest, tell us to eat when we're hungry. So we're curious, our poll for you is, have you, before this presentation, because now Bella and I hope that you are empowered and enlightened to listen to your body, but how many times have you pushed past those signals? Maybe you're fatigued and you just push past that, or you're hungry and you push past that. How many times have you just kept going harder and longer with life? Tell me if you can relate with a 1 in the chat box.
Way too often. I agree, Lindsay. I think most of us here can definitely say way too often. Frequently.
Yeah.
Very much. It's almost daily. Yeah, Leslie, that's a great point. Sometimes it almost becomes a habit or a pattern just to keep pushing through, and then usually that leads to some sort of burnout or issue that arises. Most definitely.
So we can all hold each other accountable for listening and being a little more in tune with the feedback that our hormones give us so that we can support them and keep them functioning in their best way. So we're going to end the presentation talking about summarizing the things that you can eat and drink to support healthy hormone function, and some lifestyle choices as well. So first off,
cruciferous veggies. These are amazing plants. They are natural detoxifiers. They help our liver get rid of toxins and excess hormones, and they also help fight inflammation in the body. They've been proven to prevent certain cardiovascular diseases and some cancers like colorectal or gastric cancers. And a study showed that a 1 serving increment in the vegetable intake was increased with a 20% lower hazard of cardiovascular related death, which is crazy to think. Just increasing, your cruciferous veggie intake by 1 serving can, lower it by 20%.
That is awesome. Yeah, I'm going to go have a big helping of broccoli now. Another thing that's important for hormone health is omega-3 fatty acids. So you can get this from salmon, tuna, walnuts, flax seeds, olive oil, avocados, chia seeds. These are all high in omega-3 fatty acids, and fat is really helpful because it makes up our cells to begin with, and then it helps our bodies have a starting point for building hormones. And then specifically, these healthy fats can fight off inflammation in our bodies that can occur naturally or can be exacerbated by our lifestyle. So getting some healthy fats in, really important, and can also help with the satiating part of a meal as well.
So next up is protein and fiber. They work together, even alone, so well to keep us full and satiated. So things like salmon, tuna in limited amounts, eggs and poultry, and then the nuts and seeds and other sources of plant-based proteins like peas really help us stay full and keep our energy up. And they also create a great foundation for our hormones to, be steady throughout the day and throughout our life. If this is how we're consistently eating, if we get enough fiber and protein on a regular basis, we really set ourselves up to have more of a steady ride in our energy and our hormone levels.
The other thing you may not have heard of before is adaptogens. These are chemicals that occur naturally in foods and can be found in a lot of teas. And even if you're not drinking an adaptogen tea, which Republic of Tea is a great brand that has a couple different varieties of adaptogen teas. Maybe it's ginger tea or raspberry leaf tea. All of these things can be a wonderful thing, especially if you were inspired by the beginning of the presentation when we were talking about caffeine in the afternoon. If that is an issue for you, maybe switching to a wonderful tea can be a nice relaxation habit that you can implement. But adaptogens, they will just help strengthen the way your body handles cortisol. So in today's world, we have lots of stressors, we have lots of pressures on us, and to just have a strong foundation for that is helpful. And you can find these products just at your grocery store in the tea aisle.
So we have a couple of questions here before we get on to this. Do we have to watch poultry with its hormones in them, like grain-free versus organic? Absolutely. That are in our food can actually affect what goes on within us, and we actually are going to talk a little bit about this, so we're on the perfect slide. But if you can buy grain-free organic chicken, that can be helpful. Also taking into consideration what the animal eats and what situation they're in and how their hormones are affected can definitely affect us.
Yes. So these are the items that can impact our hormone health negatively, especially in excess. So high mercury fish. So that's why Bella said tuna in moderation, because tuna can be one of those. You can find specific brands that are lower in mercury. Too much animal protein, especially the processed kind, or as Bella was just saying, also excess sugar. While we do promote you enjoying what you love, if it is in excess and you're lacking a lot of the other nutrient-rich foods, then that diet can be disruptive to hormones. And like we mentioned before, a big, large calorie gap or restrictive dieting can be very detrimental to our hormone balance.
And then environmental toxins are a huge component as well. So environmental toxins include, the chemicals found in our cleaning supplies, makeup, skincare, plastic containers, and pesticides that are sprayed on foods. And these toxins can create some discrepancy in what normally goes on with our hormones. So that's why it's so important to know what goes into the products that you use and the foods that you ingest. And it is not necessary to eat organic because eating fruits and veggies is more important than eating organic. But every year there is a list called the Dirty Dozen that is released, and it is 12 foods that are suggested to be bought organic if possible. And that's a kind of a good reference point. Like I said, it's not necessary, but if you are worried about the consumption of pesticides, it never hurts to take a look at that list and see maybe the foods that you are eating are on that list, and just kind of go at your own discretion, because we really believe that if you can get fruits and veggies in any form, that's really what's most important.
Absolutely. So I want to start to sum this up with, or round things out with, the Goldilocks principle. And that's just to say that our endocrine system is designed to keep us in that balance or homeostasis. It likes things to be just right. Now, it can totally handle the occasional teeter-totter that challenges it, but when there's a nonstop influx of too much, our hormones will get resistant or worn out, and that's when we start to see dysfunction that could be ongoing or could lead to disorders. So it's really important for us to notice when our body is telling us something to avoid going beyond that just right amount. And what that looks like in summary is, with all the stress that we experience in life, that we are spending plenty of time giving our bodies recovery exercises to fill our, Lucy and I often say, fill our cup. Well, this is filling your jug up with things like good nutrition, regular sleep, gentle movement, fulfilling activities, social connections, positive emotions, time in nature, and mindfulness. So all of these things are not just fluffy self-care. It's really important, and our bodies and our hormones need that time to recover so that it can be stronger and manage the things that it's faced with. So wow, we have packed in a lot in this hour. So what we've learned today is that understanding hormones means starting with the awareness of our very complex endocrine system. And we just kind of touched on the surface.
And hormones are, little messengers. They take in data from what's going on in our inner and outer world, and then they pass the message along throughout the body.
And we can support the natural ebb and flow of hormones through good nutrition, movement, and mindfulness.
And that's why it's important to slow down and listen to some of that biofeedback, because a lot of the time our body is trying to tell us something, and if we can tune into it, then we know how to support our body and react accordingly.
And as your friendly dietitian and nutrition coaches, we will end with reminding you what food choices help support your hormones. First, eating cruciferous vegetables.
Filling up on that yummy and satiating fiber and protein.
Supplying your cells with the healthy fats they need.
Enjoy a nice cup of tea full of adaptogens that will help your body recover from some stress that maybe you went through the week.
Avoid excess from toxins or animal proteins, sugar, or mercury.
And remember to be consistent with your meals and to fuel up adequately and on a regular basis.
And lastly, think twice about caffeine and alcohol. And we will end with some questions, and feel free to share your favorite takeaways. That always makes me really happy to hear the little bits and pieces you got from our presentation today. We do have a question that I want to start with, and it's what to do about that afternoon sleepiness. I was a little bit surprised because when I was doing research from Matthew Walker, who I mentioned earlier, he said that regardless of what we eat at lunch, we're all going to experience that natural slump in the afternoon. And now, as your friendly dietitian, I'm saying that lunch is still very important. And if it's balanced, you're going to have more sustained energy in terms of blood sugar. That natural dip in energy related to that hormone flow. So I want to say that I have a magic answer for you, but it's just kind of a force of nature that we have to deal with. And maybe if, we can move towards scheduling our day around that dip, or getting a little boost from some sunshine, or walk outside, or taking a little mindfulness break, closing our eyes because we stare at the screen so long every day. Just doing some of those things to honor that dip and to do a little bit of recovery in those moments.
Absolutely. And I think just jumping off of that, it is a little bit inevitable, when you're up and you hit the ground running and, it gets later in the day, it's only natural for your body to start to get a little bit tired. But I think that is even a reason to further continue, this idea of honoring your body. So maybe make sure you have a good afternoon snack, something with, some yummy carbs and protein and fiber to help give you a little boost in energy that will carry you throughout the day. And I love what Kristen said about getting outside, feeling some sunshine, maybe just if you can even open a window and feel the fresh air for a second, things to just naturally kind of lift your spirits.
That was a great question. Any other questions before we officially wrap up this fun hour about hormones? We're all ears. Really hope you got some gems today, and this was a helpful session to learn a little bit about what's going on in our bodies. It was really fun for us to prepare for this and do our research on it. And we appreciate you all being here today.
Most definitely.